Hello and welcome to today's online lecture on researching Black soldiers in the Civil War. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Vice President of Education and Programming here at American Ancestors. I will be your moderator for today's session. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history, and we are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. This program today is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. And giving today's presentation is Jonathan Hill at American Ancestors. Jonathan is a researcher for the 10 Million Names Project, an initiative dedicated to recovering the names of the estimated 10 million men, women, and children of African descent who were enslaved in pre- and post-colonial America between the 1500s and 1865. Jonathan has served as a board member of the Friends of the Town of Bedford Cemeteries. His historical research resulted in the installation of government-issued headstones for unmarked Civil War soldiers' grave sites around the country. He also works as a volunteer researcher for Virginia Tech's Civil War Photo Sleuth Project and has contributed to the Greenwood Cemetery's Civil War Project. In his free time, he wrote, directed, and produced 2 feature-length Civil War documentary films. His areas of genealogical expertise include military records, New England and Southeastern U.S. research, and deed and property records. Now, by the conclusion of the American Civil War, an estimated 179,000 Black men had served in the U.S. Army and another 19,000 in the Navy. In today's session, we will provide an overview of the records and tools that can be used to uncover the stories of Black Civil War soldiers, including compiled military service records, muster rolls, descriptive rolls, widows' pensions, disability certificates, the 1890 Veterans Census newspapers, and after-action reports, as well as a few others. Jonathan will present for about 45 minutes, and then we will have time for questions at the end. So at any point during the presentation, go ahead and type your question into the Q&A panel that you see at the bottom of your screen. There is a syllabus that's available for purchase at our online bookstore. You will find a link to that in your reminder emails, and I'll also include that in my follow-up email after today's broadcast. But we are recording this event, and starting later today, you can freely go back and review any of the content from the presentation on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you miss something on today's first listen, don't worry, you can always go back and review it later. All right, so without further ado, I will go ahead and turn things over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much for coming out to today's presentation. We're going to be discussing a few resources that are available to help genealogists find information about Black Civil War veterans. Civil War records can be an invaluable resource when researching into family history, and the records we're going to be talking about today, the records that are available. But first, we need to talk about some generalized facts that will give us a better idea of how the records work and some overall historical context. So these are a few quick facts at a glance. There's approximately 179,000 Black Civil War veterans that served in the Union Army. This is more than 175 regiments of Black enlisted soldiers that were raised during the American Civil War. Roughly 10% of the Union Army consisted of Black soldiers. So these regiments had a higher than the rest of the Union Army for casualty rates. So roughly 1 in 5 Black soldiers died during the American Civil War. And they participated in over 450 battles and skirmishes during the course of the American Civil War as well. So we're going to kind of be talking about a few clues that your ancestor might have been a soldier in the American Civil War. And we're going to get into these in greater detail as we go through. But just kind of offhand, if the soldier is listed as UA in the 1910 census or in the 1930 census as a veteran of the Civil War, that is kind of a good sign that you might be looking at a Civil War veteran. Also, if your ancestor appears in the 1890 veteran schedule, that's another good sign that your ancestor might have been a Civil War veteran. Newspaper obituaries also sometimes will list military service or membership in organizations like the Grand Army of the Republic. We're going to talk about each of these more in depth a little bit later on. But before we do that, we got to get into some more context. So what is a regiment? A regiment is a military unit that would consist of about 1,000 soldiers. Each regiment would be divided into companies. Infantry regiments consisted of 10 companies of 97 enlisted men and 3 officers. So each company would have also an alphabetical designation. So company A all the way to company K. Now you may note that there is usually no letter J used in these companies, and that's because it was too visually similar to company I. Oftentimes soldiers would have their company's letter designation emblazoned on their uniform, and it could cause battlefield confusion if there was a J, as it looked pretty similar to I. So you see lots of company Is, but you'll very rarely see someone in company J. So there are a few different types of regiments as well. So we can talk about infantry regiments, and that's going to be pretty much the soldiers who are going to march in on foot. This is going to make up the largest percentage of the Union Army. So we can kind of think about these as the guys that are, they're marching on foot, they're carrying muskets, they're kind of the ground force of the Union Army. The other thing we have too is artillery. So soldiers who would work with cannons or very large artillery pieces would be in the artillery. They wouldn't have companies, they would have things called batteries. So if you see battery A, B, C, D, it's the same as company A, B, C, and D in infantry and cavalry. But again, same idea. These are soldiers that are going to work with cannons and artillery pieces. And the third one that we have also is cavalry. So cavalry soldiers are going to be fighting on horseback. They're going to be kind of going up in front of infantry units. Kind of they're used more for reconnaissance and quick things as well. So that's kind of what the cavalry are going to be, soldiers that are on horseback. But pretty much you'll see soldiers broken up into one of these three types of regiments usually. We also have state regiments. So in April of 1861, President Abraham Lincoln is going to call for each state to create volunteer regiments to serve in the Union Army. These regiments are going to be created on a state level, and the way that you know they're a state regiment is they're going to have the name of the state in the name of the regiment. So in March of 1863, the first Black regiment was created for the American Civil War, and it was created by the state of Massachusetts, the 54th Massachusetts. You can see that has the name Massachusetts in the name of the regiment, so we know it's a state regiment. However, other states are soon going to follow and create more state regiments that primarily of Black soldiers. So here are some examples of some state-run regiments that Black soldiers served with. So you may be familiar with the 54th Massachusetts, but they also have the 29th Connecticut, the 14th Rhode Island Heavy Artillery, 55th Massachusetts, 1st Kansas, 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. So again, there are more of them, but those are, you just kind of have to learn as you go along which ones are primarily consisting of Black soldiers and which ones are white units as well. But these are some examples of some state regiments that had Black soldiers in them. The other thing you're going to see are national regiments. So in the 22nd of May, 1863, the U.S. War Department creates the Bureau of Colored Troops. This allows the Union Army to create Black units on a national level. So these regiments are going to be given the designation of USCT, or U.S. Colored Troops. Each regiment is going to consist of roughly 970 Black enlisted men and about 30 white commissioned officers. So these are going to be on a national level. See, as you can tell, there's no state listed. It's not the 54th Massachusetts. It's going to be, on our next slide, we'll see some examples of what that regimental titles will look like. So there are 175 USCT regiments during the American Civil War. So we have the 1st USCT Infantry all the way up to the 138th USCT Infantry. We have the 1st USCT Cavalry all the way up to the 6th USCT Cavalry. The 1st USCT Heavy Artillery all the way up to the 14th USCT Artillery. So again, we're seeing that there's no state in the name of these regiments. It's just national Union regiments that are consisting of primarily Black soldiers in the American Civil War. So we're going to talk about some resources that are going to be available to you if you are researching into the lives and stories of these individuals. So things that are going to be really helpful are going to be your compiled service records, pension records, regimental muster rolls, the 1890 Veterans Census, and soldier home records, as well as many more, but these are just a few. So we're going to start with our first case study. So this is just a standard 1880 census record for a man by the name of Juan de Callanes. As you can see from this record, he's living in Montpelier, Vermont. He's employed as a barber, and he's born in 1844, so he's 36 in the year 1880. This is going to be kind of just a standard census record, but since he's born in 1844, we can say, is it possible that he could have been a Black Civil War veteran? And we're going to kind of work on that and see if we can figure that out. So the first place I'm going to look to see if Juan de Calaynes was a Civil War veteran is within newspapers. Organizations are going to be listed sometimes in newspaper obituaries that might indicate Civil War service. The first of which, and the most common of which, is something called the GAR, or the Grand Army of the Republic. So this is a fraternal organization for Union veterans during the American Civil War, and they funded a lot of charitable organizations and and things like that. So when a veteran died who was a member of the GIR, oftentimes they would supply, funeral costs, or the GIR might offer sympathy, or they may host funerals and things like that for veterans of the Civil War. So sometimes you'll see in people's obituaries the words GIR and then a specific post listed, and we'll see an example of this later, but this is kind of an idea of maybe this person had Civil War service, because you can think of the GIR kind of like, the American Legion, or the VFW, or a place like that where veterans could go after the war and socialize with other veterans. Another organization that was around was the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States. This often gets abbreviated over to MOLLIS. Now, MOLLIS was only available to soldiers that were officers in the Union Army, so enlisted men would not be part of MOLLIS, but if you see that in obituary, it's possible this soldier might have been a Civil War veteran as well. So when you're looking for newspapers, a few resources that I would recommend are sites like newspapers.com, Genealogy Bank, Newspaper Archive, Google News Archive. Archive.org surprisingly has a large amount of newspapers that have been digitized on there as well. We typically think of archive.org as more of a place for books, but there's quite a number of newspapers on there as well as local repositories. Sometimes, local papers will be on microfilm or whatnot in libraries near where the soldier lived. So, sure enough, we're going to look into Juan de Calaynes, and we have a card of thanks. We desire to extend our thanks to our friends and neighbors and members of the Brooks Post GAR for their sympathy. Regard from Mrs. Juan de Calaynes. So we can see here that Juan de Calaynes' family is thanking the Brooks Post of the Grand Army of the Republic. So this is an indication to me that this soldier might have been a Civil War veteran. So what's our next step into finding about Juan de Calaynes? We're going to look for him in the 1890 Veterans Schedule. So as you most likely know, the 1890 census is primarily gone. It was destroyed in a fire at the National Archives. But one of the things that has survived is the 1890 Veterans Schedule. And this is going to list a lot of things about Civil War veterans that were currently alive in the year 1890, such as their residence, their rank, regiment, enlistment date, separation date, length of service, and actually pretty comprehensive disability information as well oftentimes gets reported on the 1890 Veterans Schedule. So this is a typical example of what a 1890 Veterans Schedule may look like. And so there's this can be divided into two parts. The first is the top part. As we're pointing out here, this is the top section. And then there's also a bottom section that corresponds as well. So there's numbers to the side, and if you track the numbers between the two sections, you can actually get a pretty comprehensive list of what's going on. So Juan de Calaynes, as you can see, is second from the bottom. And we learned from this that Juan de Calaynes is listed as a quartermaster sergeant, a QMS, in his rank file. We also see that he's in Company A of the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. We have his dates of service, so it looks like he was serving until November of 1865. And then we can look down at the bottom section relating to that. So we see his number, and we trace it down to the bottom. And we see that he's in Montpelier, Vermont. It doesn't look like he suffered any disabilities that he was stating in the year 1890. But as you can see from other folks on the page, that you can oftentimes see that, that gets pretty descriptive about exactly what disabilities were incurred during the American Civil War. So if your ancestor, did have a disability at the time of 1890, it might be recorded in this section here. So again, here's just a closer look at the section of Juan de Calaynes, the two sections that we have here. So gives you kind of an idea of what might be available to folks on the 1890 Veterans Schedule. So Juan de Calaynes did not live to the 1910 census, but I do want to point it out because in 1910, there's a special column for veterans of the American Civil War. It's column 30, and it's over to the side. And if you see oftentimes on, when we're looking at census records, we're very much focused on on the left side of the names and the relationships and the ages. But if you go all the way to the other side, sometimes really important information can be recorded there. And things like that are column 30, for example, where it will list if someone is a veteran of the Union Army or Navy or the Confederate Army or Navy. So veterans of the Union Army will be listed as UA in the 1910 census. And now this is not always comprehensive. Many census takers didn't record this information or just left it blank, but sometimes it's definitely worth looking if you suspect someone to be a Civil War veteran and you want to see if they're alive in 1910. You might be able to find some evidence of that if the census taker chose to record that information. Similarly to the 1910 census, the 1930 census has a special column listed for veterans as well. Now, you must remember by 1930, World War I has already occurred. So if a soldier is a veteran of the American Civil War, they will be listed as CIV in this column. So the first column says yes, and the second one says CIV. Veterans of the First World War, you'll also see a yes in the veterans column, but the designation, it will say WW1 as opposed to Civil War. So probably the best resource for finding information about a Civil War veteran is something called a Civil War pension record. And these records, we're going to talk about a few different types of Civil War pensions, but the first place to start when even beginning to think about Civil War pension records is the pension index card. So what can be learned in a Civil War pension index card? So if the soldier enlisted under a name that was different than the one that they used before or after the Civil War, they're going to be listed on the card there. So it was fairly common as Black soldiers would often use, different spelling variations or even different names after the end of the American Civil War. So it kind of shows, what the name of the soldier was at the time of their enlistment. And it will also list you, if they were going by a different name at the time of applying for a pension, that would be listed there as well. Soldiers' widows' names are often recorded if the widow applied for a pension. The regiment and company the soldier served with. We have the date the soldier and widow filed for a pension. We have the state of residence for the soldier or the widow at the time of the pension record as well. So here is Juan de Calaynes' pension index card. So we have the name of the soldier, Juan de Calaynes. We have the widow, Anna J. Calaynes. We have the service, 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. So again, we know we're looking at the right guy because all this information checks out to what we saw in our earlier record. But we have a really important detail here in that he served in the American Civil War with the name James W. Collins. So that's going to be an alias. So when we say alias, we think of something often more nefarious, but aliases really just mean that the soldier was serving under a different name than they were, at the time that they were in the Civil War. So oftentimes, like I said, people are changing their name frequently post-Civil War. So this is just a way of showing, okay, if you're looking for the record relating to the service of Juan de Calaynes, you're gonna have to find it under the name James Collins. The other thing that we note is that we can see he filed for a pension in August of 1890. We also have his widow applied for a pension, and she applied in 1908. So something that's really helpful too is, you can figure out, okay, so Juan de Calaynes was definitely alive in the year 1890 because he successfully applied for a pension in Vermont, but we know his widow also successfully applied for a pension as a widow in 1908. So this gives us kind of a good idea of, okay, well, now we know that he must have died sometime between then. So it can give us, if you can't find an exact death record, it's kind of helpful to be able to find that record as well to say, okay, we know he died between these dates. Great, so we're going to move on to what is contained within a pension record. So there are 3 main types of Civil War pension records. The first is an invalid pension record. The second is a widow's pension record. And the third is a minor's pension record. And we're going to get deep into this as we go along. So what is an invalid pension record? For veterans who suffered disabilities during the American Civil War, they would be eligible for an invalid pension. So this can think of this essentially as a disability pension. But during the American Civil War, it's going to be called an invalid pension. So what would you need to provide to be able to successfully apply for an invalid pension? Well, you would need proof of military service. Usually this is going to come in the form of a witness testimony for the soldiers who served. So people who served with the applicant. So somebody who knew this soldier, knew that they served with them. You might see some witness testimony for that, or you might even see records themselves, such as discharge papers or things like that, that show that the soldier served during the American Civil War. You're also going to need proof of a service-related disability. This gives great insight into the life of the soldier before and after the war. So people that knew the soldier before the war and they could attest to their good health beforehand, they might have to make an affidavit. Likewise, you're also going to get affidavits from people who knew the soldier after the Civil War and could attest to their poor health and or disability after the war. Also, we're going to have a lot of medical history in there. So the last part of the invalid pension was where the physicians are going to attest to the medical history for these soldiers over time. So usually it's a pretty comprehensive idea of the soldier's health over the course of many years. So how do I find an invalid pension? Well, very few of the pensions have been digitized. Most of them have to be ordered from the National Archives. Some are under 25 pages, and some can be over 700 pages. I've seen them go that long before. So again, we're dealing with very, very, you don't really know what you're going to get. But if the soldier has a pension and it's successfully approved pension, you're going to get a lot of information. So what is a widow's pension? So after the death of the Civil War veteran, a widow was eligible for a pension should she require government assistance. If the veteran was unmarried, his parents could apply for a widow's pension if they relied on the veteran for survival. So again, we're dealing with, you think of it as like a widow as someone who was married, but also parents or extended family or anyone that was really relying on the veteran's pay for survival could be eligible for a widow's pension. So what is usually included in a widow's pension? Well, we're going to need proof of marriage. If the widow the widow would have to prove the date of the marriage to the soldier, so marriage record or sworn testimony. If the marriage occurred during the time of slavery, the widow could supply an affidavit and find witnesses who were acquainted with the couple and who witnessed the marriage. And this can actually give valuable insight into the lives of formerly enslaved Civil War veterans that otherwise would not be recorded. We're also going to need proof of military service. So again, the widow is going to need to find testimony of people that served with the applicants or discharge papers or something that proves that in fact her husband or dependent was a Civil War veteran. So you're also going to need proof of death of the soldier. So you're going to have to prove that the soldier had died. So a death certificate might be available if the soldier died after the war, or if the soldier died during the conflict. Oftentimes regimental surgeons will provide written testimony that really gives valuable insight into the final moments of a Civil War soldier if the surgeon or someone who knew the soldier is testifying that the soldier died in battle or of disease or whatever it is. You're also going to need to find proof of dependency. So the applicant would have to prove that they were dependent on the soldier for survival. So again, this will be sworn testimony asserting that the widow didn't remarry or verifying that the person needed government assistance. In some cases, you'll even find handwritten letters from soldiers home to, from the soldiers that are in the war, writing to their mother, father, wife, brother, showing that they're, giving their money from their paycheck to the family. So if you couldn't prove that you were dependent on the soldier, you could submit the soldier's letters home that might show that that you were in fact dependent on the soldier's pay, which is incredible because oftentimes you'll actually get really, really valuable just daily letters home in these pension files that are giving you really valuable insight into the soldier from their own words, which I think is really incredible. So how do you find a widow's pension? So many have been digitized on Fold 3, but the vast majority have not been. And those are, again, held in Washington, D.C. in the National Archives. So let's just look at an example of some of the pages from a widow's pension. Here we're going to be looking at the pension of a man named Pompey Cotton, and the widow is Sarah Cotton, and she's applying for a pension. So a few things that we can learn from this. One, we can learn that Sarah Cotton is a resident of Norfolk, Virginia. That the adjutant general has records in the service section, that this was a Civil War veteran. So again, she's proving service. She's going to have to prove that he died at Balfour General Hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia, of wounds received in action. She has supplied a Surgeon General's report showing that he died of wounds received in action. And then on the next little section, it says the marriage, January of 1860, shown by witnesses present and statements. And it looks like they had no children, so it says none. But usually, you would actually see a full listing of children that that were children of the couple will be listed there. So let's look at some more pages that are in this pension record. So here is actual testimony from Sarah Cotton, and she is, personally appeared before the Notary of the Republic. And she's claiming that, she's a widow of Pompey Cotton, who was a corporal in Company D, 38th Regiment, USCT. She says that she married Pompey Cotton at Deep Creek, Virginia, October 25th, 1860. She says there was no written record of her marriage nor regular ceremony performed, but they lived together as husband and wife by consent and permission. And then she actually lists the name of her husband's enslaver. And she says that she was a free woman, but they continued to live together in the same domicile until his enlistment. And she's saying, that they had witnesses that could attest to that. So from this record, we're getting a lot of information from Sarah herself, talking about, some information about Pompey's former enslaver, talking about his military service, and talking about the actual date of their marriage, which you wouldn't find in any records because, again, she says there was no regular ceremony. And it wasn't. We wouldn't be recorded in the way that normal, the marriages outside of slavery would have been recorded. So again, this gives us really valuable insight into those the lives of these individuals. So let's look at a minor's pension record. So if a veteran and his spouse had died and left children under the age of 16, the children's guardians would be eligible to apply for a minor's pension on behalf of the children. So what would be included in this? Well, you would need to prove that the soldier had died and the spouse had died. So you would need to have either a death certificate or, like we had said before, a regimental surgeon or a soldier attesting to the death of the soldier. And then you would also need to provide, witness affidavits or a death certificate for the spouse. Then you would need to list all the children. So the applicant would show that the soldier left behind orphans that are under the age of 16. Applications would include the exact ages and birth dates of the children. So again, you would need to supply birth records or baptismal records or witness testimony of people that were well acquainted with the family. You'll also need to see proof of guardianship. The applications had to show that the children were under the custody of a guardian who needed government support to care for the children. So those are what you're going to kind of have to prove in order to get a minor's pension. So minors' pensions usually are not digitized. And again, they also must be ordered from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Here's an example of a minor's pension. So this is the case of a soldier by the name of Joel Benz. Joel Benz was a sergeant in Company B of the 3rd USCT. His children, Joseph Benz and Joel Benz, are being listed as minors here. And again, we have similar to the docket page for the widow's pension, you're listing everything that's going to be in there. So again, the death of the soldier, saying he was killed in action, and in evidence of his death. You're also going to have to show proof of marriage, which we see up there, and then the death and remarriage of the mother. So again, now we're seeing what the cause of death of these children's mother was, and the date of that, which it looks like is 1867. We also have the names of the children, so Joseph and Joel, and their exact birth dates, and the exact year that they will become 16 years old. So again, we're showing that, which is particularly helpful. We're also looking at the proof of their ages. So, you kind of have to prove that they are the age that they say that they are as well, which is particularly helpful. Okay, we also have, more information that's kind of just talking about some things that are, available to learn more about Joseph and Joel Benz from this document as well. So where do we find pension numbers? So again, if you were going to apply for a pension, let's say we wanted to get Juan de Colen's pension, you would have to use the application and the certificate number that I have circled here. So for his invalid pension, we're dealing with his application number, which means that he applied for a pension. And we also have the certificate number, which means that he successfully got a pension. Oftentimes you'll see people that will have an application number, but no certificate number. And if that's the case, it means they applied for one, but didn't receive a pension. And that goes the same for the widow's pension as well. So you want to get the full record, you want to make sure that there's a number in the application and the certificate, in the application and certificate numbers for both. So how do you order a pension? Pensions can be ordered from the website of the National Archives. Pensions can be viewed in person at the National Archives. On option 3, and this is the option that I would recommend for most people, is go to an independent researcher or have a company, there's companies you can find that will go on your behalf to the National Archives and digitize pensions for a small fee for the client, but it's going to be a lot quicker. So for example, a company that does that is Go for Records, and there's other companies out there too that you can definitely find, because the National Archives gets kind of backlogged frequently with people ordering pensions and larger files. So sometimes it's better just to send a researcher on your behalf to go to the National Archives, or if you're local to DC or want to make the trip out there, you can go and view it in person yourself, and that is free of charge, I believe. So now the next thing we're going to talk about is a compiled service file. So this is going to be a chronological file listing the service of a Civil War soldier. And it kind of gives you a great look into the day-to-day life of a Civil War soldier. So what is actually in a compiled service file? So you have a cover sheet, details from the company descriptive book, monthly muster rolls, muster out rolls, and additional material. So this is what a cover sheet looks like. It's going to list the name of the soldier. Like here we are. This is James W. Collins, so Juan de Colanes. We're going to see that he enlisted as a private, and he is mustered out as a quartermaster sergeant. So again, that checks out with what we had seen prior on the 1890 and other records as well. And it also gives a listing of all the pages that you're going to find within this document. So here is the company descriptive book. So from this, we're able to learn a lot of things from this. Is usually the first page in a compiled service record. So it's going to list the age of the soldier. It's going to list the height of the soldier, the birthplace of the soldier, the eye color, the hair color, occupation, enlistment date, enlistment place, the regimental officer that the soldier was enlisted by, how long the soldier enlisted for, and any notes and remarks. So like I said, this is going to be a really valuable resource because these usually would be contained in very large books where each soldier would, be on a register. But again, these get compiled down into these compiled service files, and this kind of gives you an idea of all the things that are on this big book from the company descriptive book, distilled down onto a page. And we're also going to look at the monthly returns. So every 2 months, the soldier would have a new card in their file showing what they were up to during that time. So again, we're going to have, this is showing July and August of 1864 for James W. Collins, and we see that he's present. So the soldier's rank, promotions, demotions, those are all going to be covered within the month. They'll have a monthly card as well. So if the soldier was present during this time, or if they're on, if they're on detached service or in the hospital or on furlough, that's all going to be reflected on these monthly service returns. Okay, so we're also looking at the muster out rolls. So if the soldier was with a regiment till the end of the Civil War and end of their term of service, they're going to be recorded on a muster out roll. So this is going to give the soldier's rank at the time the regiment was mustered out. It's going to list the place and date where the regiment was mustered out, any money that was due to the soldier, and the date of their last payment. And also, it's also interesting on the remarks section, you'll also see other notes too. So we see, for example, on the James W. Collins's, that he was free. He was a free man as of April 19th, 1861. So it gives us kind of an idea about their background too, sometimes in these remark sections. As you can see, this one is showing that he was not enslaved as of April 19th, 1861. My favorite part of any Civil War compiled service record is the extras. So in the final section of the service file, usually there's a lot of documents relating to the soldier's service, but it can literally be anything. Some things that are often found in extra sections include original enlistment documents, hospital records, letters from the soldier regarding their service, discharge papers, surgeon certificates, casualty papers, court-martials, disciplinary records, promotion records, prisoner of war records, anything. This can all usually be found in the additional section of a compiled service file. The other thing I kind of want to talk about is Register of the Deaths of Volunteers, 1861 to 1865. So if the soldier you're researching had died during the American Civil War, it's likely they'll be recorded in the Deaths of Volunteers. This is going to list the name of the soldier, the date of the death, the cause of the death, and the regiments of many of the Union soldiers who died in the American Civil War. So it's not comprehensive, but it is most helpful if a soldier died by disease. They're most likely going to be in this collection. Or if they died in a smaller battle or a skirmish, they also might be recorded in this collection. So again, this is going to be helpful for people that died in a hospital or died in somewhere where a regimental surgeon can attest to the death. That's when they're going to be in this collection. But there's a few places they also might not be in this collection, and I'll explain that next. So if you look in the Register of Deaths of Volunteers, 1861 to 1865, and you can't find the person you're looking for, it's because it's not a comprehensive collection. And some reasons that it might not be included in there is if the soldier died as a prisoner of war and a regimental surgeon couldn't attest to the death, or if the soldier died in a large-scale battle where there's mass casualties that don't get reported until much later, they might not be in this collection. Or if they died at home while away on furlough, or in somewhere that they wouldn't have been in a military hospital, again, they may not be recorded in this collection. So here's an example of the Register of Deaths of Volunteers, 1861 to 1865 for Joel Benz. We had talked about Joel Benz earlier, but as you can see, Joel Ben, he's a sergeant. He's in Company B, 3rd USCT, and he is dying near the St. Johns River, it says. It says he's killed in action, and it lists A.M. Barnell as the person who is, attesting to the death, and he is ARS, meaning Assistant Regimental Surgeon. One of my favorite things when researching into soldiers of the American Civil War is to look at after-action reports, because I think that they're oftentimes underrepresented in researching the soldiers. So after a skirmish or a military engagement, regimental commanders would often file an after-action report with the War Department. These get published in a series of volumes called War of the Rebellion. And these volumes are on Google Books and Internet Archive. And the reason that they're kind of overlooked is because oftentimes they won't list, soldiers by name. But if you were looking for information about a specific date or battle or skirmish that your ancestor might have fought in, you can see what their commanding officer would have written about that day in an after-action report. So here's an example of the after-action report for the action that Joel Benz was killed in. So again, we're seeing Headquarters Department of the South. It's being written by W.L.M. Berger, who's the Assistant Adjutant General. He's saying on March 7th, 1865, a party of soldiers and scouts, nearly 30 in number, were commanded by Sergeant Major Henry James of the 3rd USCT, and that they penetrated the interior through Marion County. And they actually rescued 91 people from slavery. They captured 4 white prisoners, 2 wagons, 24 horses and mules, destroyed a sugar mill, a distillery. So again, we're getting a lot of information about the actual, what was going on the day that he was killed in his regiment. So we kind of understand the context of how he went into battle and what actually occurred during the skirmish. I also want to talk a little bit about National Soldiers' Home records. So in March of 1865, President Abraham Lincoln is going to sign in legislation creating the National Asylum for Disabled Soldiers. The purpose of these homes is to provide a place for disabled soldiers to live and sailors to live. So admission to this home is going to be voluntary, so soldiers could request, which home they wanted to live in, or when they wanted to leave, or when they wanted to come. So again, that's pretty good to know. And it's also that these institutional registers are available on Ancestry.com. So what can one find in a soldier's home record? Well, you're going to be able to find the dates that the soldiers served, detailed disability information and medical information, regiments and companies of service. You're going to be able to see the physical description of your ancestor at the time that he entered the soldier's home. You're going to be able to find the birthplace of the soldier, religion of the soldier, and occupation. So here's an example of a soldier, Francis H. Murphy of the 54th Massachusetts, and we're able to kind of learn the place that he enlisted, his rank at the time of enlistment, the company, the regiment, the time and date of discharge, the reason for discharge. But again, also we're seeing really detailed disability information and the reason that they were admitted to the home. We also see the birthplace of the soldier. We're seeing the age of the soldier, the height of the soldier, complexion, eye color, hair color, ability to read and write, religion, occupation, reason for discharge. We're seeing their marital status. And then also if the soldier happened to die while living in the home, you're also going to see in the general remarks section really detailed information about the things that they owned and the property that they had. So again, we're seeing that he had 2 bank books, 1 watch, things like that can kind of give us an insight into the lives of these soldiers as well. Last thing I want to talk about is on the battle database. So this was established by our 10 Million Names project, and it's an index of Black Civil War soldiers that currently includes lots of information on these 3 regiments that you see up on the screen right now. We're hoping to add a lot more to come, but we're starting off with the 54th Mass, the 55th Mass, and the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. And the idea behind it is it's kind of going to be a one-stop shop for all the information that kind of biographical information that we had kind of talked about through the compiled service records or the pension index cards. And I'll kind of show you how to walk through that. So if you go to the 10 Million Names website and you click on Search Databases, you're going to want to click on the Battlefield, Record of Soldiers, Veterans, and Refugees. Then you'll type in the name of the person you're looking for. Now, it is to remember here that we're only talking about the 54th, 55th, and 5th Mass Cavalry. Now, eventually we're going to have more, but those are the names of the soldiers. If you had an ancestor in one of those regiments, then he'll most likely come up. So we're looking for James Oliver right now. And then you'll see a record like this. So we have James Oliver, we have his race, occupation, place of birth, residence, enlistment date, company, separation date, reason for separation, physical description, rank, pension application number, pension certificate number, the date the soldier filed for a pension, the date, the place they filed for the pension in, the dependent, all their application certificate numbers, if the child applied for a pension, the minor application numbers, and the soldier's date of death. So again, these are compiled from a variety of sources, places like compiled service records and pension index cards and things like that. But we're trying to kind of combine it into one resource so that, if you're looking for a soldier, you don't have to jump between pension index cards over to compiled service records. This is all going to kind of be in one spot. But again, we're starting to build this out more and more as time goes on. So let's talk about some published resources that are available. So one of the things I want to talk about is the Roll of Honor. That's going to be kind of a series of books that are going to list, burial locations of soldiers that died during the American Civil War. I'd already talked about the War of the Rebellion series. So again, that's where you're going to get your day-to-day your records of the day-to-day actions of different regiments. But there's also things like regimental histories. So we're looking here at the regimental history of the 54th Massachusetts. It's called A Brave Black Regiment, and it was published by Louis Emilio, who was one of the officers of that regiment. And this is not uncommon. You see this quite frequently, that after the war, soldiers in certain regiments will actually publish books that are kind of talking about the history of certain regiments and can give really good firsthand accounts of people that knew certain soldiers or information about their time during the American Civil War. We're also looking at Black correspondent Thomas Morris Chester. He provided some great resources from the American Civil War as well, as a correspondent for the newspaper. There's also, books of letters. And I always prefer, if you're looking for a great read, I would recommend African American Faces of the Civil War, an album by Ronald S. Coddington. That book is really helpful because it highlights, I think, like 30 or 40 Black soldiers who were actually photographed. And through their photographs, Ronald kind of goes through and talks about the records that are available and how he researched each individual in the photograph. So again, it's kind of a great case study if you're looking for how to research certain people. That's a great resource as well. So just to review, we're going to search for newspapers relating to military fraternal organizations, identify if the soldiers appeared in the 1890 veteran schedule, check Civil War pension indexes, find compiled service records. We're going to order pension documents if the soldier applied for a pension. If the soldier died in the war, make sure to check the register of deaths of volunteers, and definitely make sure you check out those after action reports for additional historical context. So thank you so much for coming out, and let me know if you have any questions.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your fantastic presentation. Before we get to your questions, I do want to let you know about a few upcoming events. So next Thursday on November 16th, Eileen Paranti will be discussing the settlement house movement and research within the United States. On Thursday, November 30th, we'll introduce you to the Jewish Neighborhood Voices Oral History Project, which was developed by our Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center. Also starting at the end of the month is a 4-week online course on New Jersey research. And do consider joining us in December for our virtual research tour, the Fall Stay at Home, in which you'll receive one-on-one consultations with a genealogist, attend lectures, demonstrations, and really gain practical tips for advancing your family history research. You can learn more about these programs and others at americanancestors.org/events. All right, so let's get to some questions. If you have anything that you'd like to ask Jonathan, go ahead and type it into the Q&A panel. So maybe one point of clarification. So with the pension index cards, are those available to search online? And if so, where?
Yes, so the pension index cards are available in a variety of different sources. Some are available on Ancestry. They're all available on Ancestry.com and Family Search, as well as Fold 3 has a great number of pension index cards on there as well.
Great. And one of the participants, Valerie, mentioned that Fold 3 announced that they do have a kind of a trial version, and it's free through the 12th of this month, I think in honor of Veterans Day. So that might be useful if you're wanting to test that out or do some searches. You do need to register, but if you're interested in learning more about that, just go to fold3.com. One participant asks, what records, if any, are available for Black soldiers who died before the end of the war? You mentioned the registers. Are there other sources to kind of seek out if your ancestor did die during the course of the war?
If your ancestor died during the course of the Civil War, like I said, that register should be helpful. But again, if they're not in the register, again, if they had a widow or a family member that was dependent on them, those widows' pensions are going to be your best case of information. But also, you're going to get a lot of information about casualties and deaths from the compiled service records as well. So I would highly recommend checking those options out, even though some of them it's helpful for if your ancestors survived the Civil War, but it's also very, very helpful if they didn't.
And speaking of those registers, Ellen asks, where do you access them? Are they available online? Do you have to get them in print?
No, it's a great question. Those are all available on Ancestry.com as well.
Great. Let's see. Tom asks, is there a single website or source that contains the compiled service records of all USCT soldiers and sailors?
Yes, so every single USCT regiment has had their full compiled service records digitized. And those are all on Fold 3. So again, if a lot of states have not had, if you're dealing with a state-run regiment, a lot of states have not had all of their compiled service records digitized, but the entirety of the USCT has been digitized for their compiled service records. So again, that Fold 3 would be your place to find that.
Dolores asks if a pension application was filed but not granted, so there was no certificate number, were the applications destroyed?
In some cases, they were, because from the way that I understand it, oftentimes, in some cases, it's definitely worth trying to apply for the application, but a lot of the applications were destroyed in the early 1900s to make room, from how I understand it, to make shelf room. So people that didn't get that didn't successfully apply for a pension, sometimes the actual applications have been spared, but in many cases too, sometimes the applications are not available. But for sure that the full pension file will be available if you have a number in the application and the certificate, then it should be available. It's kind of hit or miss if it's in the application and not the certificate number.
Now, Miriam says we are seeking Black Civil War veterans from Jamaica Plain, especially those from the 54th and 55th Massachusetts regiments. Where would we find those, and how can we cross-index to the neighborhood? So it sounds like the on the battlefield database is the place to go. Can you search by place of birth, or how would you kind of narrow that down to, say, Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a way if you go on the battlefield to actually just kind of list out all the names. I believe if you don't fill out any information, you just hit submit, it should give you a listing of every single soldier within the database. As it currently stands right now, we're only dealing with the 54th, 55th, and 5th Mass Cavalry, which in your case should be pretty helpful, as many of those people do have connections to Massachusetts. So it might be worthwhile to kind of look and just see who's in the database and if that corresponds to any of the people that you're currently researching from Jamaica Plain.
Now, we have several questions asking about records for the Confederacy.
Yes.
And can you comment on that and Black soldiers who were kind of forced to serve?
Yes, absolutely. So there actually is some records relating to that. Now, I'm not certain the entirety of the comprehensiveness of that particular collection, but it is on ancestry.com and it is called, I'm just trying to pull it up here because I don't know it offhand. It is called yeah, actually I can't find it right now, but if you look up like in the keyword section of the card catalog on Ancestry, Confederacy and slavery, it should come up. And what it is it's a listing of every person or enslaver that was paid by the Confederate government for labor, for enslaved labor. And so it's particularly helpful because it does list the first names of the people that were working on projects for the Confederate government. And that I don't know how comprehensive that collection is, but it does give really valuable insight if you knew the name of the enslaver to see if any of that enslaver received funding from the Confederate government related to projects that might have included ancestors.
Now, Tom asks, are the published resources that we mentioned provided in digital format? And I can bring up that list again, if I can get back there. So any of these available online?
Yes, so actually almost all of them are, with the exception of the last two. They can all be found on archive.org or or on Google Books. And to go back to that previous question, the collection you will want to find is Confederate Army payrolls for enslaved labor. And it's on ancestry.com. And I would recommend that if you're interested in Confederate enslaved labor. But yes, as far as the published resources are concerned, Roll of Honor is online, War of the Rebellion's online, A Brave Black Regiment is online, and the papers of Thomas Morris Chester are all online.
Fantastic. Let's see. Some other questions. So Joe asks, so after the war, how soon were pensions available to veterans? And also, what was the length of time of the payment?
That's a great question. So when, as I had mentioned earlier in my presentation, the first start to see Black Civil War regiments being raised as early as March of 1863. However, the U.S. Army had been granting pensions since early 1863. So pretty much as long as there has been, Black regiments being raised during the American Civil War, you're seeing pensions that are being issued right alongside that. So if you're dealing with a soldier that was a Black Civil War veteran, then and they died in the war, then they almost certainly will have died in the time that pensions were availably given out and going forward. Soldiers could keep applying for a pension as for the rest of their life. So there really wasn't a limit to how long they could be receiving a pension for.
Evelyn asks, any tips about tracing soldiers who were Canadian and served in the Union Army?
Well, so yeah, that's a great question. And pretty much if they served in the Union Army, they're going to be in the Union Army, so like the records will be held at the National Archives, or they will be held in other repositories, depending on either the state or if there was just standard US Army, they'll be held there. So you're not really having to deal with much in Canada because again, that would be just the soldier would be from Canada. But as far as military records, it would all be within the United States.
Great. Let's see. Mary Ellen, are there hospital records? She's looking specifically for the 31st Regiment in New Orleans, but can you talk a little bit about hospital records
Yes.
more generally?
Sure. So hospital records are going to be really helpful. And those are all pretty much going to be in your compiled service files. Like I said, that are on fold 3. So if you're looking for a specific soldier, their hospital records usually shall be included either in one of the cards for a hospital register, or sometimes you'll even get really detailed hospital information in that extras section that I had talked about earlier. So again, you're going to see the compiled service record is going to be your place to look for hospital records.
We have another question just asking kind of the context of, kind of the circumstances around enlistment for Black soldiers. I mean, did they
Sure.
enlist voluntarily? Were they forced to join the Union Army? Was
Yeah.
there any kind of,
And
you know,
yeah, I don't want to speak too generally, but I would say the vast majority of Civil War veterans were, enlisted. I'm not sure if I would imagine, I don't know if the draft, I'm not sure if the draft would include people of color, but I know that in my experience, the majority of soldiers that I've seen with enlisted voluntarily into the Union Army.
all right, let's see, just a few more questions. When I was introducing you, you clearly have a lot of experience with cemeteries and
Mhm.
Civil War veterans. Pamela says that, the 1930s tombstone survey says USCT, but I can't find a headstone application. Is that possible?
Yeah, so the applications that are online, you're probably talking about on Family Search, on Ancestry, they have a lot of the applications to get those particular tombstones, and those only date from very specific years. So a lot of those applications, are not digitized, or in some cases they would have just been, they would have been ordered but wouldn't have been recorded in the same way. So a lot of them are on Ancestry, but it's not comprehensive, the ones that are on Ancestry. So again, the headstone you might be looking for might be entirely it might be there but just not digitized, because it's only specific years and very specific places that have been digitized as far as the online applications that are digitized.
Now, Roslyn asks, so when I request a pension file from the National Archives, will it include the extra documents that you described that may be available?
Yeah, so the extra documents I talked about are from the compiled service records, and those will be digitized on fold 3. However, when you order a pension record, you're going to get everything that's in the pension record. So, like I said, it could be 5 or 6, 7 pages, or it could be 700 pages. You just really don't know what's in it. But they're going to digitize whatever is in that file for that soldier. But as far as those extras, that those are going to be digitized on fold 3 through the compiled service record and not the pension.
Melody says, so to do in-depth research of Civil War, African American soldiers buried at the Antietam battlefield in Western Maryland, what would be the best process or the best place to kind of start that research?
So if they're buried in Antietam, Maryland, you might want to look at the record. So on Ancestry as well, there's collections related to national cemeteries. So if a soldier gets buried in a national cemetery, they'll show up in a return from that national cemetery, which is on ancestry.com. And that's really helpful if a soldier is buried in a national cemetery. So what you would do is you would go to the card catalog and write in national cemetery in the keyword section, and it should be, if you sort by most populous record, you should come up, and that will give you a pretty good idea of some information about the soldiers that are buried in national cemeteries.
A few more questions. Peter asks, how can we find records of bounties paid or promised during enlistment for USCT?
Sure, that would also be in the compiled service record. There should be information about bounties and payments, things like that will all be included in a compiled service file.
And you mentioned this briefly, but Hazel asks, so did slave owners receive money for the enslaved who volunteered to be soldiers?
In some instances, you can see sometimes, especially in soldiers in USCT regiments after the war, sometimes in that extras section I was talking about, you might see it listed where an enslaver was requesting money from the government. It doesn't always mean it was granted, but you'll at least see sometimes in those extra sections, you'll find records that will talk about if an application was made, such as that.
And Elizabeth asks, are there any kind of record substitutes for the 1890 Veterans Census, schedules if you're looking for places like Georgia and Florida. Is the 1900 census the next best option? It sounds like the
Yeah,
1900
well, so
census didn't ask.
1890,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, 1890 is pretty much kind of a standalone thing. Like you're not going to see veteran schedules very much for other censuses outside of the 1910 and 1930 that I had mentioned.
Okay. And then finally, Charles asks, is there a repository of photos of USCT soldiers and their families? You mentioned the Ronald Connington book, but are there other places to look if you're specifically looking for photographs?
Yeah, so if you're looking for photographs, there's a variety. I mean, a lot of people have private collections. A lot of people in the photograph world kind of collect Civil War photos, but I would recommend going to Civil War Photo Sleuth. If you just Google it, it's a wonderful resource, and it's a crowd created website where collectors share their Civil War photographs and can upload their Civil War photographs. So you'll see a lot of really wonderful photos of USCT soldiers, and you can search by name and information to see if your ancestor happened to be photographed and is currently on Civil War Photo Sleuth. And it's completely free of charge, so it's good to look at.
Well, thank you again, Jonathan. Thank you everyone for your fantastic questions. If we didn't get to your question, you may want to utilize our free service, Chat with a Genealogist. Just go to americanancestors.org/chat. This is free, open to the public. Just ask your reference question or maybe questions from this webinars or others. And it's again free online from Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5 Eastern Time. Or you may also consider booking a consultation with one of our experts. And if you're interested in that, getting one-on-one assistance with your family history research, just go to consultations@nehgs.org. So thank you again for joining us, and you will have an opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback on today's session as we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings. Any and all feedback is very helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to help keep these programs free and to create others. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, visit us at americanancestors.org. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.